Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we discuss the Student Debt Relief Plan. If you have been following the news, then you would have seen President Joe Biden went out and he announced that he was going to forgive $10,000 of student loan debt. And if you qualified for the Pell Grant, which basically means that you have a financial need, it's a low income barrier, where if you have a low income, you can also get a Pell Grant. They are able to have an additional $10,000, so a total of $20,000 that they can have removed of their student debt. Now, the concern by many is a couple things. One is, hey, is that even fair? That doesn't seem right. Two is that even possible for the president? Doesn't normally Congress have the purse strings? Don't they normally make those decisions? And then the third one is, aren't we trying to figure out inflation? So if we are spending more as a government and giving more money to people, doesn't that ultimately mean that we're going to be increasing inflation? And I think all three of those are fantastic questions, and we'll discuss each of them in some way, shape, or form without really getting too political, but we will discuss each of them. So President Joe Biden, he had made the campaign promise that he was going to forgive some student loan debt. And along the way, there's been different companies, different for-profit universities where he has forgiven some of those debts, where the most recent, I believe, was the ITT Institute, where they no longer exist. So those degrees are basically worthless. And so the federal government said, you know what, we're not going to have you pay for this worthless degree. Now, obviously, people can always make the argument that you make your own choices, so it becomes your job to kind of live with those consequences. And that argument's always fine and it's reasonable. I'm generally on the side that the government every single month is subsidizing someone, something, some country, some company, and sometimes some people. And so I don't really get too worried in it because that's what the government does. It takes our money and then it gives it to someone else in some way, shape, or form. And so that is just what happens. If you spend so much time worrying about why winter comes, then we're not spending enough time preparing for winter. Winter comes every year, and there's nothing that we can do about it. It is going to snow. It is going to kill. Now, granted, I live in Florida. We don't have a whole lot of real winters, but we do have a hurricane season. And hurricane seasons, they come every single year over a span of about half the year, which is kind of crazy to live in Florida knowing that you'll have hurricanes. But as a result, we spend our time figuring out how to build houses, how to build infrastructures that reduce flooding quickly, that don't have roofs flying off. Usually anything below a Category 2 storm, we often are able to withstand that fairly well because of the investments that we've made in the infrastructure. So I say that to say that when you understand what someone's campaign promises are and they're going to make them, the best thing that we can do is just assume that they are going to happen, make a plan, a contingency plan if it doesn't, and make a plan for if it does. I'm often reminded of the parable where we talk about someone getting paid a day's wage. The way the story goes, there is this landowner who had a vineyard and he was paying people to work in his vineyard. If he reached you at 9 a.m., he said, you know what, I'm going to pay you a day's wage if you come and work for me for a day's wage. If you met him at noon that day, he said, hey, you come work with me, I'll pay you a day's wage. And even if he met you an hour before closing, he said, you know what, I'll pay you a day's wage, come on and work with me, I'll make sure it's right. Now, the people, as they were getting paid, they started with the people who came in last. So if you worked an hour, you got paid your day's wage. If then the people who worked like 4 hours, they got paid their day's wage. And then the people who worked all day long, they were like, okay, look, you just paid a day's wage to the person who worked for 1 hour. You just paid a day's wage to the person who worked for 4 hours. I worked a full day, right? I hit my whole 8-hour shift and I feel like I was carrying in abundance of that load. Surely you're going to do right by me and pay me more than a day's wage. And if you know the story, they were paid a day's wage as well. Now, those people were upset. They were like, wait a minute, I just watched you pay people who worked a fourth of the time that I worked, and you paid them the exact same amount. And the landowner basically said, look, I told you I'd pay you a day's wage. That's what I paid you. Right? That's what we agreed upon. Surely I can do whatever I choose to do with my money after that. If I want to pay someone else a day's wage for doing less, that's my prerogative, right? You shouldn't be mad at me for being generous. And while the student loan forgiveness isn't a 100% match with the story, and I get that, and you don't have to like make the comments where you're bringing up the nuances, I agree. It's not a perfect match, so we don't even have to go down that road. What I have noticed is a lot of the concern is I have paid all of my student loans off, so this forgiveness doesn't benefit me at all. In fact, it discourages, it almost makes me look like a fool because I paid all of my student loans. And some people are saying, look, I took out a inheritance to pay it off, and I could just kept the inheritance. I could have invested in something else, and then you would have forgiven my loans anyways, and I would have been better off. But just like the parable, in the sense that the agreed upon contract is the agreed upon contract. The agreement that each of us have to pay back our student loans is exactly that. And anything that happens after that, that helps some and maybe discourages others, that's just what happens after that. But the actual agreement is, I'm going to give you this amount of money, you're going to go to college, and then you're going to pay me back based on a certain interest rate over a certain period of years. Now, different legislation has come and gone where we've added different things, where if you work in the nonprofit sector or you work in the public sector with the government and you make the income-based payment over a span of 10 years, where you have the ability to have your student loans forgiven. That wasn't always an option, but it was added in there. There's always going to be different changes within the laws, and that's what the government's prerogative is. They get to choose how they do that. But when you and I sign up, we signed up based on the agreement that we had, which is, I'm going to take this money, I'm going to get a degree, and I will find a job that allows me to pay back that degree within my income as I continue to build other aspects of my life. Now, it's not always pretty and it's not always fun, but we can only plan for the way that we know the cycles will be. And we know that when someone says, I'm going to make it a campaign promise to forgive student loan debt, and then that person gets elected, then we shouldn't be as surprised when they just follow through on that plan. Now, for those that are concerned from the inflationary perspective, I would definitely say that that is a very reasonable and noticeable concern. Now, the government would say, look, what we did is we're only going to push back the payments restarting to December 31st of 2022. They will start again on January 1st of 2023. And as a result, we're going to be taking some of that money out of the economy, which is going to help in the battle with inflation. But in the meantime, it is fair to say that when people have more money, then more money, it means that you're going to be spending more. That if you had another bill, then you would spend less. If you have one less bill, then you spend a little bit more. It's why once we realize how crippling debt can be, while a lot of the times we want to make sure the debt we have is good debt, where it's allowing us to expand our reach, expand our influence, and grow our wealth, versus having debt that is siphoning and taking away our wealth and growing another company's or another person's wealth. Now, from a tax perspective, as most debt forgiveness would be considered income, they actually passed the law back in 2021 where it won't be considered income federally. So it won't impact your federal taxes, but on a state level, it's going to depend on your state. Some states have laws where it simply says whatever the Fed do, that's what we do. But then other states have laws where it's standalone, where they say, you know what, this is still going to be considered income because it was a debt that you had and you no longer have to pay it. So you would want to check with your own state to see how that's going to work out for you. But if you are in a state where $10,000 or $20,000 is going to be added to your income, that could move you into a different tax bracket. So you want to plan ahead for that. Now, if you're not, then obviously you don't have to worry about it. Federally speaking, they are not going to charge that $10,000 or $20,000 as income. It's also worth noting that the amount that you can make as a household is $250,000 to qualify for this. Or if you make $125,000 as an individual, then that's what you would need to qualify for that. I believe the number said that that's going to be roughly around 60% of the people who have student loan debt, that is going to be something that they qualify for. They're shooting for the middle class. If you like the video, I ask you to like and subscribe, and feel free to check out other Wisdometric videos if you're looking for ways to eradicate financial stress, generate passive income, and build a prosperous retirement strategy.